When my sister got a $600,000 penthouse as a wedding gift, the whole family toasted her like she had invented love itself. The room glowed with champagne and laughter, the kind that comes too easily when people are proud of themselves by proxy. My mother dabbed at her eyes, saying, "Our Sienna always knew how to pick a man who provides." My father raised his glass, nodding with approval. I stood near the buffet table, holding a plastic flute, half full of cheap sparkling wine, smiling the way you do when you're trying to disappear. When I finally spoke softly, carefully, I said I needed to borrow $6,000 to cover my staff's paychecks for the month. My father blinked, confused. My mother tilted her head, pity already forming in her eyes. 6,000, Isabella, no one throws money into holes, dear. Sienna laughed, the kind of laugh that lands like a slap. Come on, Izzy. No one saves losers. That's when the room fell silent, not out of shame, but satisfaction. And in that silence, I promised myself one thing: 6 months from now, I would never have to ask anyone for anything again. The room I grew up in wasn't really a room. It was a storage space left of the staircase, the one that collected heat in summer and mold in winter. My parents called it cozy, like the word could fix the smell of damp carpet or the peeling paint by the radiator. Sienna got the big bedroom upstairs with white curtains and a view of the dogwood tree that bloomed every spring. She was delicate, they said needed sunlight. I was strong, so I learned to live in the dark. The window in my room faced the alley where the trash bins lined up like quiet sentries. I used to watch my breath fog against the glass and wonder what it would feel like to wake up somewhere. No one apologized for forgetting me. By the time I turned 10, I was already the family's errand girl. I walked to the store for groceries, helped Mom sort bills, kept Sienna's secrets when she broke the rules. Every praise came with a reminder. You're the strong one, Izzy. I didn't know. Strength could be another word for invisible. Dad worked long hours in real estate and came home smelling like aftershave and disappointment. When he was tired, he'd sit at the kitchen table reading contracts, ignoring the sound of my sister crying upstairs because she couldn't find her favorite sweater. I'd climb the stairs, calm her down, and fold the sweater myself. That's what love looked like in our house, one person breaking quietly so the others could stay whole. After college, I moved to New York, built something from scratch, a small financial consulting firm called Lumen Advisory. I started it with 3 employees and a dream as thin as the walls in my apartment. We helped startups manage their books, planned budgets for small businesses, found solutions no one else cared enough to offer. I wasn't rich, but I was steady. Until one client, a boutique wellness brand, suddenly pulled out of a contract worth $40,000. Just like that, my cash flow vanished. Rent, payroll, utilities, all waiting. I stared at my spreadsheets late at night, numbers blurring like raindrops on glass. The next morning, my team showed up cheerful and unaware. I smiled, told them everything would be fine. It wasn't. The following weekend came Sienna's engagement party, an event so overdone it looked like a movie set. Crystals hung from the ceiling. A violinist played on the balcony overlooking the Hudson. I arrived late wearing a dress I'd bought on clearance 2 years ago. The doorman almost didn't let me in until I gave my name. Inside, laughter and perfume mixed thick in the air. Sienna floated through the crowd in a silver gown, her fiancé beaming beside her, my parents glowing with pride. Isabella, Mom, called, her voice rising above the chatter. Come see your sister's new home. The penthouse stretched wider than any apartment I'd ever stepped in. Glass walls, marble floors, a view of the city that made even the clouds seem expensive. I tried to be happy for her, truly. She was my sister. But when Dad clapped his hands together and said, "This place cost $600,000, but for our girl it's worth every cent," something in me sank. My hands felt cold despite the warmth of the room. Dinner was served on a terrace lined with fairy lights. As the champagne flowed, conversations blurred into bragging. I waited for a pause, my chance to speak. "Dad," I began, "I need to ask something." He looked up from his plate, still chewing. "Could I borrow $6,000 just until next month? One of my clients pulled out unexpectedly and I need to cover payroll." The words felt small, humiliating even before they left my mouth. The table quieted. Sienna set down her glass, smirking. "You're still doing that little company thing, right? Maybe it's time to let it go." Mom sighed, folding her napkin. "Sweetheart, it's not that we don't want to help, but you have to be realistic. Business isn't for everyone." Dad cleared his throat. 6,000 is not pocket change, Isabella. You should have saved better." I nodded, my heart thudding like a clock in my ears. "Of course," I said softly. "You're right." But Sienna wasn't done. She leaned forward, eyes sparkling like the champagne in her glass. "You know what they say, Izzy, no one saves losers." The laugh that followed wasn't cruel by accident. It was deliberate, rehearsed. Even Mom chuckled, just a small polite sound, but enough to slice through me. I stood up slowly, every eye on me. "You're right," I said, my voice steady. "No one saves losers." Then I set my glass down and walked toward the elevator. No shouting, no tears, just the sound of my heels against marble and the faint music still playing behind me. No one called after me. The elevator doors closed with a soft sigh, sealing me in the quiet I knew too well. Outside, the city air hit like cold water. I walked until the buildings thinned, until I found a bench by the river. The skyline shimmered across the dark water, every window a reminder of someone else's life. I thought about my staff, about the bills waiting on my desk, about the girl in the room left of the staircase. She had survived worse. I took out my phone, opened the banking app, and stared at the numbers that didn't add up. Then I closed it. For the first time, I didn't feel desperate, I felt clear. When I reached my apartment that night, the hallway smelled like paint and cigarettes. I hung my coat, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the floor. The quiet was heavy but familiar. I pulled out a notebook from the drawer and wrote 3 words at the top of a blank page: 6 months plan. My pen trembled, but I kept writing: new clients, online services, partnerships. I didn't know how yet, but I would rebuild. I would become untouchable. I thought of their laughter, their perfect table, the way my mother's voice trembled when she said, "Be realistic." Realistic, I repeated in my head. Maybe that's what they called it when they'd already stopped believing in you. I drew a single line under the words on the page and wrote one more sentence beneath it. Let them laugh until they look up. When I finally turned off the light, the city glowed through the cracks in my blinds, painting silver shapes across the floor. Somewhere out there, Sienna slept beneath a chandelier paid for with someone else's love. Somewhere out there, they were sure I was done. But the truth was simpler. I wasn't finished. I was only quiet. And silence in the right hands can build an empire. That night, as I stared at the blank page titled 6 months plan, I realized the only way to survive their silence was to outgrow it, and by the time the sun rose over New York, I was already packing what was left of my office to start again. When I moved back to New York, I thought the city would remember me, the girl who once believed effort alone could rewrite her story. It didn't. My old clients stopped replying to my emails. The landlord left 3 voicemails about overdue rent, and the Lumen advisory sign outside my shared office peeled from the glass like a tired sticker. The city doesn't remember people who fail quietly. It moves on, blinking in lights you can't afford to turn off. But I wasn't planning to stay invisible forever. Inside the office, the air smelled like dust and printer ink. Boxes stacked against the wall, invoices waiting for payment. Cynthia, my last employee, sat across from me, holding her coffee like it was the only thing keeping her warm. "I'm sorry, Izzy," she said. "I can't keep waiting. My rent's due next week." I nodded, unable to look her in the eye. "I understand. You deserve better." She smiled softly, the way you do when you're leaving someone to drown. "You'll figure it out. You always do." When she left, I stayed seated, staring at the empty chair across from me. The hum of the old heater filled the room like static. Then, without ceremony, the lights flickered once and went dark. I sat there in the silence until my reflection in the window blurred into the city beyond. That night, I walked home through drizzle that soaked my hair and papers alike. A taxi sped past, splashing water across my legs, and I didn't even flinch. I passed restaurants glowing with laughter, people leaning over candlelit tables, the smell of garlic and wine filling the air. My shoes squeaked with every step. I wondered if they ever imagined what it was like to be on the outside of those windows watching invisible. I reached my apartment, a fourth-floor walk-up, where the radiator hissed, and the window latch rattled in the wind, and I sat on the bed, staring at my phone. No new messages. I opened my bank app. Negative balance in one account. The number looked almost peaceful in its finality. I didn't sleep much that week. My mind replayed the dinner scene at Sienna's penthouse over and over. Her laugh, my father's, shrug, my mother's sigh. No one saves losers. The words echoed like a pulse. I stopped waiting for them to fade. Instead, I wrote them on a sticky note and pressed it above my desk. A reminder not of defeat, but of the sound of the line I'd cross. Days bled into each other. I walked to networking events that smelled like stale coffee and desperation. Everyone there talked too loud about scaling and vision alignment. I introduced myself anyway, shaking hands that slipped away the moment I said small firm. I handed out business cards that no one would keep. At night, I took the long way home, tracing my old dreams through the city lights. Once near Bryant Park, I looked up and saw Sienna's building towering in the distance, her penthouse lights glimmering like mockery. For a second, I imagined standing on that balcony again, the cold wind against my skin, her voice still ringing. Then, I looked away. The sight didn't hurt anymore, it fueled me. On a Wednesday evening, when the air smelled faintly of rain and asphalt, I went to a small startup mixer in a half-empty bar downtown. The event had promised founders, investors, and innovators, but what I found were people clutching business cards and drinking cheap gin. I was about to leave when I heard a voice behind me. Izzy Hart. I turned and froze. Leo Carter. We'd gone to college together back when we still believed ambition could solve loneliness. He grinned, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. Didn't think I'd run into you here. Still running your own thing? Trying to, I said, smiling weakly. And you look stable, he laughed. I freelance now. Build back-end systems for apps no one's heard of. He took a sip of his beer. Remember when you helped me with that budget mess sophomore year? You saved my life. Hart, I shrugged. You paid me in vending machine candy. Best deal I ever made. He leaned in slightly. So what happened with your firm? I hesitated, then told him carefully the truth. The lost contract, the unpaid staff, the silence. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he nodded slowly. You know, I've been thinking about building something new, simple, ethical, a tool to help people track their spending before they fall behind. But I'm a coder, not a numbers person. His eyes met mine. You still think in balance sheets, right? I laughed, maybe for the first time in weeks. I never stopped. He tilted his head. Then maybe we should talk. And just like that, the air shifted, one sentence breaking through weeks of fog. We spent the rest of the night sketching ideas on napkins, a clean interface, smart automation, something that could talk to banks without talking down to users. When I left the bar, my notebook was full of scribbles and coffee stains. My pulse felt steady for the first time in months. The next morning, I cleared my desk and began again. I opened my old laptop, its hinge squeaked like a warning, and started mapping out what we'd discussed. Income tracking, bill reminders, predictive budgeting, tools that helped real people, not the ones already ahead. Leo called later, his voice upbeat. I've started coding the prototype. Think of a name, yet I looked at the sticky note above my desk. No one saves losers, and smiled faintly. Arcline, I said. Because even when you fall, there's always a curve back up. He paused. That's good. Feels like you. We worked in borrowed corners of coffee shops, sharing headphones and sandwiches, speaking in half sentences that only made sense to each other. The money was gone, but momentum didn't need funding. It needed belief. Every night I fell asleep with my laptop still glowing, numbers and algorithms flickering like constellations. The sound of typing replaced the sound of doubt. I stopped checking my phone for messages from my family. I didn't need their voices anymore. I was building my own. 2 weeks later, my landlord knocked at midnight demanding rent. I handed him a partial payment, everything I had left. Another week, I promised. He grumbled, took the cash, and left. When the door closed, I sat on the floor and stared at my reflection in the window. My hair was tangled, my eyes shadowed, but there was something fierce in my expression I hadn't seen before. Something that didn't beg. Days turned into small victories. A working login screen, a smooth graph animation, the first simulated savings goal completed without crashing. Leo sent a text at 2 a.m. We did it. She's alive. I stared at the screen and smiled. She, as if the app had a heartbeat. Maybe it did. Maybe we both did again. One night, as rain drummed against the window, Leo called. You still up always? Then, listen, you're not crazy, Izzy. You were just surrounded by people who thought small. I didn't respond right away. The sound of rain filled the pause. You know, I said I used to think silence meant failure. Now I think it's potential energy. That's because you learned to aim it, he said. Keep aiming. When we ended the call, I sat in the dark, laptop light flickering across the room. I picked up the notebook where I'd first written 6 months' plan. On the next blank page, I drew a new line and wrote Phase 1 Rise quietly. I taped it over the old sticky note. The words, "No one saves losers," disappeared behind it. Outside, the city pulsed with indifferent beauty sirens, lights, voices that had nothing to do with me. For once, that felt right. I didn't want to belong to their noise. I wanted to build something that would outlast it. I opened the laptop again and watched the code scroll, a river of logic and defiance. The clock read 2:43 a.m. I smiled, whispering to the empty room. 6 months. The hum of the radiator answered like an old friend, steady and alive. Somewhere across the city, beneath chandeliers and laughter, my family slept. They thought the story was over. But I was just writing the next line. By the time the rain stopped that night, I already knew what I had to do. If they wouldn't lend me faith, I'd build something that made believing in me impossible to ignore. Revenge doesn't always start with rage. Sometimes it begins with a spreadsheet. 6 days after that dinner, I stopped crying and started building. Every number I typed into the columns felt like a heartbeat. Every formula a small declaration that I wasn't finished. The glow of my laptop cut through the darkness of my apartment. Outside, traffic hummed the city, unaware that a new version of me was forming in its shadow. I wasn't planning to shout this time. I was planning to calculate. By the second week, Leo and I had turned our late-night conversations into a schedule. He brought the code, I brought the structure. We worked from my kitchen table, papers piled between cold coffee mugs and power cords. You really weren't kidding about 6 months, he said. One morning, eyes scanning the rough diagram I'd drawn on a napkin. No, I said, I don't have time to be patient. The plan was simple, almost too simple, a financial app that would help hourly workers track spending, avoid overdrafts, and automate bill payments. We'd call it Arcline, a bridge between chaos and clarity. It's not flashy, Leo said. Good, I replied. Neither am I. The days blurred into each other, marked only by the changing light through my window. I learned to code basic scripts, scribbling syntax in a notebook like I was learning a new language. My fingers cramped, my neck ached, but I didn't stop. Leo stayed up with me on video calls, his background a cluttered apartment filled with takeout boxes and the soft hum of his computer fans. He'd show me lines of code, then grin when something finally worked. See, logic's loyal. People aren't. We laughed, tired, but alive. Sometimes, during the quiet hours before dawn, I'd catch my reflection in the dark screen. The same face, sharper, now framed by exhaustion and something fiercer. Every sound of typing became a rhythm, every click a vow. I didn't know if it was revenge or resurrection, but it was movement, the kind I'd been waiting for. Still, not everyone shared the same faith. One afternoon, I called an old investor hoping to reopen a conversation. Izzy Hart. His voice held polite surprise. "Didn't your last company fold?" "It did," I said. "I learned a lot." "Well, I wish you the best," he replied, already ending the call. The line clicked dead before I could speak again. I stared at the phone, the screen reflecting my own blank expression. That's when I wrote a new phrase on my wall of notes spilled anyway. The money ran low faster than expected. I sold my watch, canceled subscriptions, and lived on instant noodles. Leo joked about starting a diet funded by failure. "Every great invention runs on caffeine and poverty," he said. I smiled, but some nights the silence pressed too hard. I'd sit by the window watching the city burn gold in the distance, wondering if success would ever feel like enough. Then I'd remember my sister's laughter, the way she said "loser," as if it were permanent, and my spine straightened again. By the end of the first month, we had a rough prototype. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. A few buttons led to the right pages, the calculations balanced, and for the first time I saw something I'd built respond when I touched it. Leo popped open a can of cheap champagne. "To the first heartbeat," he said, raising his glass. I laughed, shaking my head. "Don't jinx it," but I took a sip anyway. The bubbles burned and reminded me that beginnings rarely taste sweet. Then came the email that stopped me mid-scroll. It was from Cynthia. She'd left weeks ago, but the subject line read, "If you're still building, I want in." I reread it twice, my chest tightening. Her message was short. "You once paid me when you couldn't afford to. Let me return the favor. No salary, just purpose." I showed it to Leo, who whistled softly. "You inspire loyalty," he said. "Or pity." "No," he smiled, "loyalty. Pity doesn't write code." We met her at a small cafe the next day. She looked different, calmer, more certain. "You were the only boss who ever apologized for being late to a meeting," she said. I figured that kind of decency deserved a comeback story. I didn't have words. I just nodded. Our team of 2 became 3. With Cynthia's help, things moved faster. She handled operations and customer feedback, Leo refined the back end, and I focused on design. The apartment turned into a workshop, whiteboards against the wall, sticky notes covering the fridge, late-night pizza boxes stacked like trophies. We argued about font sizes and error messages, but it wasn't hostility, it was energy. For the first time since Lumen collapsed, I felt alive inside a mission. I didn't need applause, I needed progress. Still, doubt had its ways of creeping in. One evening, while Leo debugged a stubborn line of code, I asked, "What if it all falls apart again?" He didn't look up. "Then we'll build again, stronger this time, and if people laugh," he smiled faintly, "then you'll know it's working." I didn't understand until later. Success doesn't silence laughter, it just changes who's laughing. By the second month, we had something tangible. Arcline could track expenses in real time, send reminders, and even analyze spending habits. I spent hours testing every button, running fake transactions, pushing it to break. Every time it didn't, I felt a small flicker of pride. We released a beta version to 20 users, friends of friends who agreed to try it. The first night we got 5 signups, the second 15. Leo texted, "We've hit 100 downloads." I stared at the number on the screen, not because it was big, but because it was real. We celebrated with tacos from a food truck at midnight. The rain had just stopped, the pavement shining under streetlights. "You realize," Leo said, chewing thoughtfully, "you're basically coding your comeback." I shrugged. "No, I'm just doing the math," he laughed. "Math can be revenge too." He wasn't wrong. I went home that night and looked around my small apartment. The air smelled faintly of coffee and exhaustion, but it was mine. On the wall above all the scattered notes, one sticky note still stood out, 6 months plan. Under it I added a new line, "Arcline will pay them all back." I wasn't thinking about money. I was thinking about dignity. Some nights I still dreamed of that penthouse, of Sienna's voice echoing through marble halls. But in my dream now, she couldn't see me. I was standing on a different floor, one she didn't know existed. And I was busy building walls made of light and logic. The kind no laughter could break. One morning Leo called, sounding half asleep but thrilled. "Izzy, it worked. The savings algorithm's stable. You're sure tested it 6 times. Arcline's officially smarter than both of us. I laughed, leaning back in my chair. Outside the city was just waking up sunlight spilling between towers, the hum of early traffic filling the air. I whispered to myself, "We're getting there," and I meant it. Later that day, as I was updating user metrics, a memory surfaced the moment I'd left Sienna's dinner. The sound of heels on marble, the closing elevator. Back then I'd thought silence meant surrender. Now I knew better. Silence was strategy. Silence was scaffolding. Every quiet night I'd spent rebuilding had become a foundation no one else could claim. When the clock hit midnight, I shut down my computer and stood by the window. The skyline blinked with lights that no longer taunted me. Each window looked like a possibility, not a reminder. I whispered one more promise into the glass. "I'm not coming back for your approval. I'm coming back for the view." Then I smiled, closed the curtain, and turned off the light. The city outside kept buzzing, indifferent and alive, but something in me had shifted. The revenge wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was measured, methodical, and inevitable, like a perfect equation balancing itself after years of being off by just one variable. And this time, that variable was me. By the end of that week, as Arcline's first 100 users signed in and the graphs began to rise, I felt the city's silence shifting, and for the first time it sounded a little like recognition. Silence used to protect me. Now it had a sound, the click of downloads, the ping of new users, the whisper of opportunity. Arcline was alive, breathing through data points and feedback forms. 3 months after we launched the beta, we had 3,000 users, and every single one felt like proof that I hadn't been crazy for believing in myself. The world didn't know my name, and I liked it that way. Recognition was noisy. Progress was quiet. Every morning started the same. Coffee, a cracked notebook, and Leo's voice over video chat. "User growth steady," he said one morning, rubbing his eyes. "We're up 12% week over week." Cynthia, sitting cross-legged on the floor, added. One woman said Arcline helped her save for her kids' braces. She read from an email, smiling. "It's the first time I feel in control of money, not the other way around." I took the printout and stared at it. It wasn't a paycheck or an award, but it was something better, proof that what we built mattered. I taped it to the wall above my desk. "That's our first win," I said. "The first of many." But growth brought pressure. Leo wanted to expand faster, bring in investors, do press. "We need visibility," he argued during one of our late-night calls. "No one funds a ghost project." I shook my head. "Visibility invites noise. We're not ready." He frowned. "You can't stay invisible forever." "Watch me," I said, ending the call before he could argue. For the rest of the night, I sat staring at the glowing Arcline dashboard, the rising numbers reflected in my glasses. It wasn't pride I felt, it was fear. I'd built this piece from the ashes of humiliation, and I wasn't ready to share it with the same world that once laughed at me. Still, the world had other plans. A small financial blog featured Arcline in an article titled, "The App Built in a Basement That's Changing Personal Finance." They didn't know who the founder was, they only knew the results. The story spread through Reddit and Twitter, labeled number, "The Silent Tech." Downloads doubled within days. The email inbox overflowed with partnership offers, media requests, and investor inquiries. Leo's excitement was almost contagious. "This is it, Izzy. They're noticing, but I wasn't sure I wanted to be noticed." The tension between us grew like hairline cracks in glass. Leo wanted sunlight. I wanted shadows. "If you keep hiding, someone else will claim credit," he warned. "Let them," I said. "The truth doesn't need a stage. You're punishing yourself for their blindness." "No," I replied softly. "I'm protecting what I built from it." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. We both knew what we were really talking about: my family, my past, and everything I refused to let define me again. Weeks passed, and so did the sleepless nights. I spent them debugging user feedback, fine-tuning notifications, writing code that blurred before my eyes. I ignored the mounting emails, the urgent labels, the flashing reminders that people wanted more of me than I was willing to give. Cynthia, ever the diplomat, tried to bridge the gap between me and Leo. You both want the same thing, she said gently. You just have different definitions of safety. I looked up from my laptop. Safety's expensive. I already paid for it once. Then came the invitation that changed everything. A financial tech conference in Manhattan reached out asking Arcline to present a panel on ethical automation and financial inclusion. They want us to demo, Leo said, waving the email. This could bring in funding, clients, everything. I stared at the screen. They want a face, Leo. They want my face, so give it to them. I shook my head. No, not yet. Cynthia, who'd been silent until then, said softly, I'll go. You've already built the voice. Let me speak it. I turned to her, surprised. You'd do that? She smiled. You gave me a second chance. Let me return the favor. I hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but we go as a team. The day of the conference arrived, gray and cold. The venue glittered with glass and ambition. Cynthia stood backstage calm and poised, the Arcline logo glowing behind her on the projector screen. I watched from the audience, hood pulled low, heart pounding. Leo leaned over. You sure you don't want to take credit? I shook my head. She's better than I am at it. You're the architect, Izzy. Architects don't need to live in their blueprints. When the lights dimmed, Cynthia walked on stage. Her voice carried the steadiness I'd once envied. Arcline was built for people who were told they weren't responsible enough, educated enough, worthy enough to manage their own finances, she began. We wanted to give them control back, not through lectures, but through logic. The audience leaned in. She clicked through slides of graphs, testimonials, screenshots. No embellishment, no pitch, just truth. And the truth was enough. Halfway through the Q&A, a man in a navy suit raised his hand. Who's the architect behind the algorithm? Cynthia hesitated for a split second, glancing toward the back row. I shook my head. She smiled politely. Arcline is a collaborative project. The man persisted. Strange, because the patent lists a single contributor, an I. Heart. Is she here? The room shifted, whispers rippling like wind through tall grass. Cynthia didn't flinch. She prefers to let the work speak for itself. So she's invisible? He asked, smirking. Cynthia met his gaze. No, just quiet. The audience laughed softly, tension dissolving. She turned back to the presentation. Now let's talk about what matters, the results. When it ended, the applause came like a wave. Not thunderous, but deep, respectful. I stayed seated, my hands still, eyes stinging. Leo turned to me, grinning. That was your voice up there. No, I said, smiling faintly. That was our silence being heard. Outside cameras flashed, journalists swarmed, but I slipped out a side exit. The cold air hit my face like baptism. For a moment, I stood there on the sidewalk, watching my breath fog in the winter light. I wasn't anonymous anymore. I was something harder to define, a rumor, a mystery, a whisper traveling through walls. That night, back in my apartment, I replayed the recording of Cynthia's talk. Her words echoed through the speakers, clean and steady. When she said quiet power, the audience leaned forward, hungry for it. I closed my laptop and stared at the skyline beyond the window. Somewhere in one of those buildings, my family probably saw the article about Arcline. Maybe Sienna smirked, pretending not to care. Maybe my mother whispered to my father, "Do you think it's really her?" I hoped they did. I wanted them to wonder. Leo texted me later. "You're trending. The ghost founder, they're calling you." I typed back, "Good. Ghosts don't get burned." He replied with a single emoji of flame, and I laughed. The tension between us softened again, replaced by quiet pride. I fell asleep that night to the sound of notifications buzzing, emails chiming, the world asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. The noise didn't scare me anymore. I'd built enough silence to withstand it. As I drifted off, one thought anchored me: success didn't have to roar. It could hum steady and unstoppable, like a current running through wires no one could see. And somewhere in the distance above the city, that had forgotten my name, that hum was getting louder. By the time the applause from the conference faded and the city lights dimmed behind me, I didn't realize the silence I'd built was about to be broken, not by failure this time, but by recognition I never asked for. I thought I could build a kingdom in the shadows, but light has a way of finding cracks. The morning after the conference, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. At first I thought it was more user notifications, maybe another article calling me the ghost founder. But then Cynthia texted, "Don't panic. Someone uploaded a clip from yesterday. You're in it." I clicked the link. The camera had caught the reflection in the big screen behind her, me sitting in the back row, hood half down, eyes locked on the stage. It wasn't clear enough to prove anything, but the internet didn't need proof. It just needed a story. By noon, headlines bloomed across every feed. The face behind Arcline, Isabella Hart, the silent founder threads, dissected my old LinkedIn posts, my deleted company profile, even graduation photos from Boston University. Someone found an archived page from Lumen Advisory. Then came the comments, "She looks familiar. Wasn't her family in real estate? Robert Hart's daughter? No wonder she had money to start over." By evening, my face was everywhere, and none of them knew half the story. Leo called, voice tense. "You're trending on 3 platforms. Maybe this isn't bad. People love a comeback." I stared at my reflection in the window. I didn't ask for a comeback. I just wanted peace. "Peace doesn't go viral," he said quietly. "You can't hide now." "I can try," I said, but even as I spoke, I knew it was useless. The light had already found me. That afternoon, my mother texted for the first time in nearly 2 years. "So, that's where you've been. Congratulations, I suppose." No emoji, no warmth, just punctuation sharp enough to cut. An hour later, my father's message arrived. "Keep the family name out of this." Sienna posted a story to her social media, a picture of a glass of wine, and the caption, "Some people never stop chasing validation." Subtle enough to look harmless, obvious enough to sting. I closed the app and laughed, a low sound that didn't feel like humor at all. The next morning, my inbox overflowed. Reporters, investors, strangers. Everyone wanted a piece of my voice now that I'd spent years fighting to be heard. "This is good," Leo insisted, pacing across our co-working space. "You can shape the narrative. Tell your story before someone else does." I shook my head. They don't want my story. They want their version of it. Cynthia stayed quiet, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "Maybe," she said finally, "but if you don't speak, they'll fill the silence for you." I looked at her. "Then let them. I built my strength there once. I can do it again." That night, a podcast uploaded a teaser, "The Woman Who Built From Betrayal, coming tomorrow." My stomach turned as I listened to the host's voice echo from the speakers. They'd pieced together half-truths from old records, and anonymous sources turning my life into a headline I didn't recognize. "Abandoned her family fortune, rebuilt after corporate betrayal, the mysterious Arcline genius." It was strange hearing my pain repackaged as content. Then came the biggest hit. A glossy tech magazine published an article titled "Arcline, the Woman Who Outsmarted Failure." On the cover, they used a photo from my college days, me smiling awkwardly at some networking event, eyes full of naive hope. Below it, they added the line, "The daughter of Robert Hart breaks her silence." I hadn't said a word to anyone. I scrolled through the article, heart pounding, until I reached the end. There, in a sidebar, was a quote from a family acquaintance. "Isabella was always ambitious." Sometimes ambition makes people forget where they came from. I didn't need a byline to know who had said it. My mother had always known how to sound gracious while twisting the knife. That night, Leo called again. "Look, this exposure, it's not all bad." Brightline reached out. My pulse stopped. Brightline, he hesitated. "They're offering a partnership. Full integration. Big money." "No, Izzy, just listen." "No," I repeated sharper. "They're the ones who bought Julian out. The ones who killed my first company. That was years ago. This is business. It's betrayal," I snapped. The silence on the line was long and heavy. "Fine," he said finally. But we can't keep pretending the world doesn't exist. I hung up without answering. The next day, Arcline's office felt colder. The buzz of optimism we'd built was gone, replaced by an unease that crept through every corner. Cynthia looked at me over her laptop. "He's just scared," she said softly. "Everyone's scared when success starts feeling real." I nodded but said nothing. Fear wasn't new to me. It had been my oldest companion. By the end of the week, an online thread titled "The Hart Sisters, The Real Story" went viral. Someone unearthed old family photos, Sienna and me at Christmas standing beside our parents. In the comments, strangers dissected our faces like crime scene analysts. You can tell which one they liked better. She probably made up the whole underdog thing. Bet the Penthouse sisters jealous now. I didn't respond. I didn't post. I just worked. Every time the world screamed louder, I wrote code quieter. And somehow the company grew faster. Silence had a rhythm, and I knew how to dance to it. But there was one thing I couldn't ignore: the email sitting in my drafts. I'd written it days earlier, then saved it without sending. A blog post titled "The Truth Behind the Silence." In it, I'd written what I'd wanted to say for years: that failure doesn't define you, that cruelty doesn't erase worth, that women can rebuild from ruin without permission. It wasn't defensive, it was defiant. That night, after hours of pacing, I clicked publish. The post went live at midnight. By morning, it had been shared 20,000 times. The comments weren't pitying, they were grateful. Finally, someone said it. "I've been her." Silent power. The hashtag spread across platforms. I watched it unfold like a tide, one post after another, women telling their own stories under that same phrase. For the first time, the noise didn't sound like chaos. It sounded like an echo I had started. My phone rang again. "Leo, you went public." His voice wasn't angry, just tired. "I didn't use names," I said. "But I told the truth. You realize this means you can't hide anymore." I looked out the window, watching the city lights flicker. "I'm not hiding, I'm standing still. There's a difference," he sighed. "You're impossible." "I'm inevitable," I said and hung up. That afternoon, a journalist from a national network emailed asking for an interview. "We want to hear the story in your own words," she wrote. I deleted the message. The story wasn't for them anymore. It was for the women who found strength in the silence we shared. For days, I avoided the news. But one morning, I caught my name flashing across a TV in the cafe. Downstairs, Arcline founder breaks silence. The anchor smiled at the camera. Her post has inspired a wave of stories online about perseverance, betrayal, and quiet resilience. The woman behind Silent Power has yet to make a public appearance. I turned away before the footage showed my face. Later, Leo texted me a link to a meme, my quote, "Silence can build louder than applause," printed over an image of a sunrise. "You're officially famous," he wrote. I replied, "Then I've already said too much." That night, I sat by my window, laptop open but untouched. The city shimmered indifferent and bright. I thought about the girl who'd once begged her family for $6,000, about the room left of the staircase, about the laughter that had chased her out of a home. That girl was gone. What remained was a woman who'd learned that sometimes the best revenge wasn't shouting your worth, it was living so fully that the silence carried your name. The noise outside didn't scare me anymore. I had outgrown it. And though the world had finally found my face, I knew something they didn't. You can expose a person. You can even name her. But you can't unlearn her quiet. The louder the world repeated my story, the more it began to twist it. And just when I thought the noise couldn't get any closer, my sister's name appeared on the screen. The first message came on a Sunday morning. No greeting, no signature, just one line. "You're welcome for the spotlight." I didn't need to ask who it was from. My sister always knew how to turn even generosity into mockery. I stared at the text for a long time, the letters pulsing faintly on the screen, before setting the phone down beside my untouched coffee. Outside, the city was quiet, clouds pressing low over the skyline. It felt like a warning. 2 days later, she called. "Well, Sienna," said her voice bright and brittle, "it looks like we're both famous now." I could hear clinking glass in the background, the sound of her curated chaos. "You should thank me," she added. "The media loves a sister story. It humanizes you." "You mean it humanizes you," I said. She laughed lightly. "Oh, don't be dramatic, Izzy. You've always had a flair for tragedy. I'm just helping balance the narrative. The world needs to see you're not some lonely genius in a basement." "I'm fine being misunderstood," I said. "You always were," she replied and hung up before I could answer. I sat there for a while, listening to the dial tone fade. It had been years since I'd heard her voice, and yet it still carried the same tone, sugar over steel. She didn't need my permission to drag me into her orbit again. She just assumed I'd spin. That afternoon, an article appeared online titled, "The Hart Sisters: One Empire, Two Paths." The cover photo was a collage Sienna, in her penthouse balcony, champagne glass in hand, and me at the Arcline office, cropped from a recent interview I hadn't agreed to. The caption read, "From high society to high tech, how sibling rivalry built two powerful women." I wanted to laugh. Rivalry, that implied equality. We'd never been equals. She'd been the chosen one. I'd been the scaffolding. Leo stormed into the office, waving his phone. "Did you see this, unfortunately? She's painting herself as your muse. Says she inspired your resilience." He frowned, scrolling. "They're even quoting her charity work. Something about mentoring young entrepreneurs." Cynthia looked up from her desk. "That's funny," she said. "Last month she charged me $500 for a 1-hour workshop." Leo groaned. "She's hijacking your momentum." "She's trying to survive," I said quietly. "What do you mean she's losing deals?" "The brands that dropped her are still talking. This is her way of staying relevant." Cynthia raised an eyebrow. "And you're just going to let her?" I looked at the glowing Arcline screen. "No," I said. "I'm going to do what I've always done, outlast her." But endurance wasn't always enough. 2 nights later, a notification popped up on my phone, a tagged post from Sienna's verified account. A video clip. She was sitting in a studio, immaculate, as ever, telling a host how she'd always believed in her sister's potential. "She just needed a little push," Sienna said, smiling into the camera. "You know, I think family can be both a challenge and a gift." I like to think I gave her both. The host laughed. "So you don't see her as competition?" Sienna tilted her head, pretending to think. "Oh no, we're so different. I build people up. She builds systems." I watched the clip twice, jaw tightening. The comment section was a battlefield, half the viewers praising her grace, the other half calling her manipulative. But she didn't care which side won. For her, attention was its own currency. Leo texted me, "You need to respond." I typed back, "No, I'll let gravity do the work." He didn't reply. By the end of the week, Arcline's traffic doubled again. Not because of her, but because of the noise. People came out of curiosity, stayed out of necessity. The louder she talked, the more users we gained. I wasn't proud of it, but I wasn't sorry either. Still, the chaos seeped in. My phone rang one night while I was reviewing performance reports. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, then answered. "Isabella." It was my father. I hadn't heard his voice in nearly 5 years. He cleared his throat. "You've made quite the name for yourself." "I didn't make it," I said. "They found it." "Same thing," he replied. There was a pause filled with the sound of ice clinking in a glass. "You should call your sister. She's having a rough time. I'm sure she'll monetize it," I said. "She's family," he snapped. "So was I." Silence. Then softer. "Don't let bitterness eat you alive. It makes people hard to love." "I wasn't aware you'd noticed," I said, and hung up before he could continue. For a long time I sat staring at the phone, the echoes of old conversations pressing against my chest. The ones where I'd asked for help and been told to toughen up. The ones where he'd called me ungrateful for wanting more than scraps. His voice still had the same texture, authority wrapped in disappointment. The next morning I woke early, walked to the river, and watched the city come alive. A jogger passed a taxi, honked gulls cut across the pale sky. The wind carried the faint smell of salt and diesel. I breathed it in like a promise. You don't need their permission anymore. When I returned to the office, Leo was waiting with coffee and that cautious look he used when bad news was coming. Sienna's been dropped by another brand, he said quietly. But she's spinning it into a rebranding journey. She's planning an event, a charity gala. Guess who's invited? I didn't even need to ask. The Hearts, he said. All of them. I laughed. Of course. The family reunion disguised as redemption. She's framing it as a partnership, he added, sliding his phone across the desk. The email subject line read Collaboration Opportunity Heart Family and Arcline Foundation. I scanned the message. She wants me to co-host, Leo nodded. Publicly. Big exposure, cameras, donors, everything. I set the phone down slowly. She wants me in the same room so she can rewrite the story live. Then rewrite it first, he said. That night I stood on my balcony looking out at the glittering skyline. Somewhere below her, penthouse lights blinked faintly, still visible from across the river. I thought of the little girl who'd once stared at her sister's window from the dark, wishing for sunlight. Then I whispered to the wind, I don't need your light anymore. I didn't reply to the invitation. But I didn't delete it either. The next morning, I called Cynthia. How fast can we finalize the mentorship initiative, the one for women in tech? Yes, launch it under the Arcline Foundation name, quietly. Before the gala? She grinned. You're turning her performance into your platform. I smiled faintly. She can keep the stage. I'll build the floor beneath it. That week we worked nonstop. Press releases, website updates, donor coordination. No drama, no cameras, just impact. By the time Sienna's event rolled around, Arcline's initiative had already partnered with 2 universities and a community bank. The press caught wind of it within hours. Arcline launches fund for women in STEM. Her gala headline was buried by morning. Sienna didn't call. But I saw her post that night, a filtered photo of her holding a microphone captioned, Sometimes silence makes the loudest point. I almost laughed. She'd learned something from me after all. I closed my laptop, the city glowing outside my window. The noise was still there, but now it had layers, hers, mine, the world's. Yet somehow in the middle of it I'd found a new kind of quiet. Not the kind that hides. The kind that hums beneath everything, steady and unstoppable. I poured a glass of water, turned off the lights, and sat in the dark watching the city pulse. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was simply awake, finally hearing the rhythm of my own life, unfiltered in mine. When her invitation to the family gala arrived glossy and insincere, I knew it wasn't an olive branch. It was a stage. And sooner or later, I'd have to decide whether to walk onto it or burn it down. The gala was held at the Rosemont Hotel, one of those glittering glass towers where money smells like orchids and old wine. Cameras lined the entrance, flashes scattering across the marble like lightning. I hadn't planned to go. For a week, the invitation sat in my inbox unopened, but heavy like a stone waiting to drop. But that morning, after a night without sleep, I found myself pulling the black dress from the back of my closet, the same one I'd worn to Sienna's engagement dinner years ago. I didn't know why. Maybe I needed to see the ending with my own eyes. When I arrived, the valet recognized the car but not me. "Miss Hart?" he asked, checking the clipboard. I smiled. "The other one," I said. His confusion followed me through the glass doors and into the ballroom. The room shimmered in gold and white, the air thick with perfume and performance. Every table bore the Hart name, my parents at the center, Sienna on stage, radiant in emerald silk. Her hair fell perfectly, her smile practiced. The screen behind her displayed the words, "Hart Family Foundation presents a night for renewal." Renewal, I thought. The rebranding of regret. I stood near the back, unseen, a shadow among sequins. The announcer's voice boomed. "And now, please welcome Sienna Hart, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and advocate for modern women." The applause came on cue. Sienna glided to the microphone, her tones syrup smooth. "Tonight is about new beginnings," she began. "About forgiveness, unity, and family. I'm proud to share this platform with initiatives like the Arcline Foundation, founded by someone very dear to me." I froze. She gestured toward the audience, scanning the crowd as if searching for me. The spotlight swept the room, once then landed near the entrance. Gasps rippled through the tables as people turned. My mother's eyes widened. My father straightened in his chair. Sienna smiled. "There she is." The applause was polite but uneasy. I walked forward slowly, every step deliberate, my heels echoing against the marble. When I reached the stage, she extended her hand. "Welcome, Izzy. Isn't it wonderful to see the family together again?" I took her hand, cool and soft as glass. "Wonderful," I said. "Almost believable." The audience chuckled, uncertain if it was humor or warning. Sienna's smile tightened. "We've both come a long way, haven't we?" "Yes," I said. Though some of us took the stairs, her fingers twitched slightly, but her voice stayed calm. "I wanted you here because this night represents reconciliation." "Does it?" I looked around the glittering room. "Because it feels a lot like marketing." A murmur spread through the tables. My father cleared his throat loudly, but I didn't look at him. Sienna's eyes flickered just once, then she laughed softly, recovering. "You always did know how to make an entrance." "I learned from you," I said. The tension was invisible to most, hidden beneath polite smiles and raised glasses. But I could feel it, the old rhythm of our family, the push and pull of pride and pity. Sienna turned back to the crowd. "What matters," she continued smoothly, "is that we stand here now, proof that family can overcome anything." I stepped closer to the microphone. "Some things shouldn't be overcome," I said, my voice steady. "Some things should be acknowledged." A hush fell over the room. I hadn't planned to speak, but the words came anyway, rising from somewhere deeper than anger. We teach people to silence themselves for peace. But silence isn't peace, it's permission. And I stopped giving mine a long time ago. For a moment, no one moved. Then surprisingly, someone started clapping, a young woman near the back. Another followed. Within seconds, the applause spread, cautious but real. Sienna stood frozen, her smile faltering just slightly. I stepped away from the microphone, heart pounding, and whispered to her, "You wanted a show. You have one." Then I turned and walked off the stage. Outside, the night air felt cold and alive. The noise of the gala faded behind me. I didn't wait for a car. I walked heels in hand, the city buzzing softly under its late summer heat. I didn't know if I'd burned a bridge or built one, but for the first time I didn't care. The next morning, headlines split in two. Some called it bravery, others called it a breakdown. Isabella Hart confronts, sister live on stage. Arcline founder sparks family feud at charity gala. Leo called before I even finished reading. "Well," he said, "you definitely stole the night." "I didn't steal it," I said. "I just reclaimed it." He laughed softly. "You okay?" "I think so." I paused, staring at the sunlight creeping across the floor. It's strange. I thought facing her would hurt. But it didn't. It felt necessary. "That's healing," he said. "Messy but necessary." For days the internet kept dissecting that moment. Some called me cold, others called me fearless. Sienna's team released a statement about family complexities and mutual respect, which only fanned the flames. But in the midst of the chaos, something unexpected happened. Donations to the Arcline Foundation surged. Women from across the country wrote messages thanking me for saying what they never could. One message stood out. It came from a woman in Ohio. "I worked for my sister's company for 10 years before she fired me for getting pregnant. I thought staying quiet made me strong. Thank you for reminding me that silence doesn't heal." I read it twice, then printed it out and taped it beside my desk. It reminded me why I'd built all this in the first place, not for revenge, but for recognition, for the ones who were told to wait their turn, and learned instead to build their own tables. Sienna didn't call. Neither did my parents. But their absence didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like distance finally settling into its proper shape. A week later, Leo suggested we take a break. "We've been sprinting for years," he said. "Maybe we should breathe." I agreed. Breathing felt like something I hadn't done in forever. So I drove north to the coast, where the cliffs met the sea, and the noise of the world couldn't reach me. I rented a small house by the water, all white walls and quiet wind. The first night I sat on the porch watching the tide roll in waves, pulling back like lungs exhaling. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel like something I had to earn. It just existed. I stayed there for a week, writing, sketching new ideas, drinking coffee until sunset. The city felt distant, a life I'd lived in another language. One evening, as I watched the water shimmer under a silver moon, my phone buzzed a message from Cynthia. "The team's proud of you. You made something more than a company." I typed back, "We made it. Together." When I put the phone down, I thought about everything that had led here. The laughter, the humiliation, the rebuilding. The girl in the room left of the staircase had finally found a window that opened to the sea. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and possibility. I whispered into it. "No one saves losers," and smiled. Because I'd learned that no one needed to. I thought the waves had finally gone quiet after that night on the coast. But peace has a fragile lifespan. By the time I returned to the city, the world had already found a new way to say my name. The video surfaced 3 days after the gala. It wasn't official footage, just a phone recording, shaky and dim, taken from the corner of the ballroom. My voice came through faintly, over the hum of chatter silence. "Isn't peace, it's permission." Then the camera caught Sienna's frozen smile and the crowd's uncertain applause. The clip ended there, but it didn't need more. By morning, it had spread across every platform. Headlines called it the heart confrontation, and hashtags bloomed like weeds: number basement sister, number quiet power, number arcline truth. I watched it once sitting on my couch with coffee gone cold and then closed the laptop. I didn't post. I didn't explain. I'd learned that sometimes silence could scream louder than outrage. The internet did the rest. Commentators dissected every glance and pause. "The sister dynamic is fascinating," one podcast host said. "It's like a live parable about power." Another wrote, "She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just dismantled years of manipulation in a single sentence." Within a week, the clip had 10 million views. Cynthia called that afternoon breathless. "You're trending globally. Half of TikTok thinks you're a feminist icon, the other half thinks you ruined a charity event." I laughed quietly. "So balance then. You're taking this too calmly." "I stopped taking things personally when they started calling me headlines," I said. "It's easier that way." But not everyone saw it as a victory. My father's assistant left a voicemail the next day. "Mr. Hart requests that you refrain from further public displays. The family has endured enough embarrassment." I deleted it before it finished playing. The noise was relentless. Articles multiplied, reaction videos, analysis threads, endless debate. Sienna stayed quiet for 5 days longer than I expected. Then her publicist released a statement. "Family is complicated. I love my sister and wish her peace as we both grow in our own directions." I could almost hear her voice in the phrasing, graceful, vague, rehearsed. The world applauded her maturity, and for a brief moment, sympathy shifted back in her favor. Until the second video appeared. Someone had recorded our exchange after the microphones cut off when I leaned close and said, "You wanted a show. You have one." The clip caught her expression, tight, brittle, unguarded. People froze, the frame zoomed in, slowed it down. The internet turned her composure into proof of deceit. By evening, the tide had turned again. I didn't celebrate. Watching someone unravel publicly isn't satisfying when you know what it costs. The next morning, my phone buzzed, non-stop messages from reporters, investors, strangers thanking me, strangers hating me. I set it on silent and went to the office. Leo was already there, 2 coffees waiting. It's chaos out there, he said. I know. He studied me for a moment. Are you okay? I nodded, but my voice came out quieter than I meant. I just wanted to tell the truth, not start a war. He handed me the second coffee. You told the truth. The war started itself. Arcline's numbers kept rising. We'd hit 1 million users by midweek. Our customer feedback dashboard overflowed with messages from people who'd never cared about tech before but now wanted to learn. The irony wasn't lost on me. My silence had built an empire and my voice had multiplied it. But the fame brought shadows. Anonymous emails, fake accounts pretending to be me, an investor backing out because the brand feels too emotional now. Cynthia handled most of it with professional calm, but I could see the worry in her eyes. You can't control the narrative anymore, she said. Then I'll stop trying, I replied. Stories evolve, so will I. That night, after everyone left, I stayed late at the office. The city outside pulsed with rain and reflections. I scrolled through the video one last time. The comments were endless, but one caught my eye. Sometimes power doesn't roar. It echoes. I stared at it until the screen blurred. Echoes. That's what this was. Everything I'd buried finding its way back to the surface. When I finally left, the elevator doors opened to reveal a woman holding an umbrella. For a second, I didn't recognize her. Then she spoke. You've been busy, Sienna said. She looked different, less polished, the edges showing through the gloss. Her mascara had smudged faintly at the corners. You shouldn't be here, I said. I had to see you, she replied. Before they twist it all into something unrecognizable. They already have. Sienna sighed, stepping into the elevator with me. The doors closed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the machine filled the silence between us. Did you mean what you said? She asked finally. That silence isn't peace. I looked at her reflection in the metal door. I meant every word. She nodded slowly. I thought, if I stayed perfect long enough, it would make everything okay. But it's like the noise never stops. It doesn't, I said. You just learn to hear yourself over it. Her eyes glistened. They hate me now. They'll find someone else tomorrow. And you, she asked, do you hate me? The elevator stopped at the lobby. The doors slid open. I stepped out, then turned back. No, I said softly. I just finally stopped trying to love you on your terms. She didn't follow me. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining. I walked until the lights blurred, until the noise turned to distance. For the first time, I didn't feel chased by my family's shadow. I'd stepped out of it completely. 2 days later, Leo called from the conference room. You need to see this. On the screen was a headline, Heart Foundation under review after financial irregularities. My stomach dropped. The article listed discrepancies in Sienna's charity accounts, unfiled donations, unpaid vendors, inflated budgets. The story was spreading fast. I read the article twice, then set the tablet down. She's falling, I said quietly. Leo frowned. Do you want to comment? No? But people will think you're behind it. I shook my head. Then they'll think wrong. Still, part of me felt a strange pull. Not satisfaction, not glee, just inevitability. Gravity always wins eventually. That evening, I sat on my balcony, watching the skyline glow against the night. A soft breeze brushed my hair, carrying the hum of traffic, the low murmur of a city that never truly sleeps. Somewhere out there, my sister was probably watching the same skyline, wondering how everything had unraveled. My phone buzzed a message from an unknown number. You were right. Silence isn't peace. It's punishment. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I opened my laptop and drafted an email to our communications director. We're donating 10% of Arcline's quarterly revenue to independent women's grants, I wrote. Call it the Lantern Fund. When I hit send, a quiet calm spread through me. The world outside was still buzzing, still arguing, still speculating, but none of that mattered anymore. The echo had traveled far enough. I closed the laptop and leaned back, the glow of the city reflecting in the glass. Somewhere below, the sound of laughter drifted up from a street cafe. It didn't sting this time. It just sounded human. The past had finally stopped chasing me. All that remained was the hum of the present, steady, luminous, and mine. The calm that followed the storm felt almost foreign, but just when I started to believe the noise had finally died down, the phone rang, and the voice on the other end dragged me straight back to where it all began. The phone rang late, somewhere between one dream and another. I almost didn't answer, but the name on the screen froze me, Dad. I hadn't seen it in years. For a few seconds, I just stared, the ringtone slicing through the quiet. When I finally pressed accept, my voice came out flat. "Hello, you've embarrassed this family enough," he said without preamble. His voice hadn't changed, still sharp, still heavy with authority disguised as care. "That circus with your sister, the articles, the interviews. We can't even go to dinner without hearing about it." "I didn't plan the circus," I said calmly. "You and Mom raised the ringmaster." He exhaled hard, like the sound alone could erase me. "Watch your tone, Isabella." I almost laughed. "You called me, remember? Because you need to hear this before it's too late," he snapped. "All of this, your company, your crusades, your online fan club, it's gotten out of hand. You're making a fool of yourself." "No, Dad," I said softly. "I just stopped making one for you." Silence. Then a low, dangerous chuckle. "You always did think you were smarter than everyone else." "No," I said. "Just quieter." He sighed, tired and impatient. "You could have stopped all this, Isabella. You could have told them you and your sister were fine, that the family supports each other." And lie again, families protect their own. I closed my eyes, feeling the old ache return. "You didn't protect me," I whispered. "You protected your comfort. That's not fair." Neither was choosing who got to matter. There was a pause long enough to hear him swallow. Then his tone softened, dangerously so. "Listen, you can fix this. Do an interview, something tasteful. Say you forgive us. Say you want peace. It'll make us all look good again." "Ah," I said. "There it is. The apology wrapped in PR." He hesitated. "Don't twist my words. I don't have to. They're already crooked." The silence stretched taut as wire. I could hear a clock ticking somewhere on his end. Probably the same one that used to hang in the hallway outside my childhood room, the one left of the staircase. "I'm not your enemy," he said finally. "You're not my anything," I replied. That landed. I could hear it in the pause that followed. For a moment his voice softened again, but not with warmth, with exhaustion. "You think this strength of yours is noble," he said. "It's loneliness, Isabella. You've mistaken bitterness for independence." "Maybe," I said. "But at least I earned mine honestly," he inhaled sharply. "Your mother cries over this, you know. She says she doesn't recognize you anymore. She never tried to. I gave you everything," he said suddenly, voice rising. "A roof, an education, a chance. You gave me silence," I said. "And I learned to build a house out of it." For a long time neither of us spoke. The line hummed softly, a fragile thread between two strangers sharing a last name. Finally he said, "You think this ends well for you. You'll burn out. The world forgets women like you. Angry ones." I smiled faintly, even though he couldn't see it. "Then it's a good thing I'm not angry anymore," his voice faltered. "Then what are you free?" I ended the call. The phone fell silent in my hand, screen glowing for a few seconds before fading to black. I sat there on the edge of my bed, the city outside, murmuring its indifferent lullaby. The old pain didn't rush back the way it used to. It just sat there, small and powerless, like a ghost losing form. I thought about calling my mother, but the idea vanished before it reached my fingers. Some bridges didn't burn, they just sank quietly beneath the weight of what was never said. Instead, I brewed tea and stood by the window, watching headlights smear across wet pavement. The steam curled against my face, warm and fleeting. In that reflection, the city, the faint glow of the kettle, I realized something that felt like both loss and peace. He'd called to reclaim control, and all he'd done was prove he'd already lost it. The next morning, Leo noticed something different. "You look lighter," he said. I had a conversation that ended the right way, I replied. "Closure, more like confirmation." He raised an eyebrow. Of what? That some doors aren't locked. They're just not worth opening anymore. He smiled faintly. You sound like you're writing poetry again. Maybe I am, I said, and meant it. The day passed in a blur of meetings and quiet productivity. When the office emptied, I stayed behind scrolling through old files, photos of our first workspace. The original Arcline sketches, even a picture of the three of us eating tacos after our first 1,000 downloads. I hadn't realized how far we'd come until that moment. Every decision, every refusal had led me here. Later that night, as I walked home through the fading light, the phone buzzed again. Unknown number. For a second, I thought it was him. But when I answered, it was Sienna. Dad's furious, she said without greeting. I'm aware. You didn't have to hang up on him. I didn't have to answer either. She sighed. He's old, is he? Stubborn. He just wants things to go back to normal. There is no normal, Sienna. There's just denial dressed nicely. You're impossible. No, I said softly. Just done. She didn't respond right away. I could hear faint music on her end, probably from another party, another attempt to distract herself from the truth, unraveling in headlines. You think you're better than us now? She asked finally. I looked up at the skyline, the endless windows glowing like fractured stars. No, I said. I just think I stopped needing your approval to breathe. She hung up. For a long while I stood in the middle of the empty street, my phone still in hand. The night air was cool, the silence vast but not lonely. Somewhere above, the faint hum of the city blended with the echo of my father's voice, warning me that the world forgets women like me. Maybe he was right. Maybe that was the point. When I got home, I opened my notebook and wrote a single line across the top of a blank page. He called twice. The first time to silence me. The second to remind me why I never should have listened. Then I closed it, turned off the lamp, and let the darkness settle. Outside, the traffic moved like a steady pulse, and for the first time in years, I didn't flinch at the sound. It wasn't the world judging me anymore. It was just life continuing. And somewhere in that noise, I found peace. After that call, something inside me settled, a quiet certainty that I was done waiting for apologies, and the next time I built something, it wouldn't be to prove them wrong, but to rise above them entirely. They said no one lives above a penthouse, but they were wrong. 6 months after that call, I stood inside a sunlit office signing papers that would make me the owner of the floor directly above my sister's. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Maybe because this wasn't just a purchase, it was punctuation. The end of a sentence I'd been rewriting for years. The broker slid the final document toward me. Congratulations, Miss Hartman, he said, using the legal name I'd filed under. You just bought the view everyone in this city dreams of. I smiled faintly. No, I said. I bought perspective. Outside the window, the skyline glittered with the cold precision of money and ambition. But for once, I didn't feel small beneath it. The building was familiar the moment I stepped inside. Same marble lobby, same scent of lilies and glass cleaner, same concierge who used to greet Sienna with rehearsed warmth. Good afternoon, he said politely, glancing at the clipboard. Are you here for the Hart residence? In a way, I replied, taking the private elevator. When the doors opened to my floor, the air felt different, quiet, unclaimed. The space stretched wide and bright walls of glass framing the city like a painting. Every sound was softened by height. I slipped off my shoes, walking barefoot across the cool wood floors. Each step echoed steady and deliberate. This isn't revenge, I whispered to no one. It's reclamation. The realtor followed a few paces behind, rattling off amenities, heated floors, smart systems, custom fixtures. His voice faded as I wandered toward the terrace. The door opened with a hush, and the city unfolded beneath me, rivers of light traffic, weaving like veins through a living organism. I gripped the railing, feeling the wind whip against my skin. Below me, the penthouse terrace glimmered with the faint trace of last night's party, glassware, ribbons, laughter that once echoed off those same walls. I wondered if she was home. 2 days later, the movers came. boxes stacked neatly in corners, furniture swaddled in plastic. I told them where to place everything, careful to avoid the balcony windows until the very end. I didn't need to look down to know she'd see the commotion. The gossip would reach her faster than the sound of my footsteps. By afternoon, a knock came. Not the polite kind, sharp, rhythmic, annoyed. I opened the door. Sienna stood there, her expression caught between disbelief and irritation. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. I leaned against the frame. "Moving in." Her eyes darted past me, scanning the empty apartment. "You can't be serious." "I am. This is the top floor." "Not anymore." She blinked as if the sentence short-circuited her understanding. "You bought this above me, technically beside you. But yes." Her laugh was brittle. "You must be joking. You don't even like heights. I like closure more." She folded her arms. "This is pathetic, Izzy. You think owning a floor makes you better," I shrugged. "No, just higher." The color drained from her face. For a moment she looked like she might lunge at me or burst into tears. Instead she exhaled slowly, regaining her composure. "Enjoy the view," she said, and turned on her heel. As the elevator doors closed behind her, I felt the strangest calm. No triumph, no bitterness, just quiet. That night I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window. From my vantage point, I could see the faint outline of her terrace, below her world of glass and gold, fragile under the weight of its own perfection. The city lights shimmered like constellations of consequence. I raised the glass toward the reflection. "Two foundations," I murmured. "They hold better when you build them yourself." The next morning, the building manager stopped by to finalize paperwork. "Congratulations again," he said. "Not every day someone buys an entire floor outright." "Thank you." He hesitated. "You'll be sharing utilities and maintenance with the penthouse unit below." "Mrs. Callahan, sorry, Miss Hart has already been informed." "Good," I said. "Please make sure her noise levels are manageable. I prefer silence." He smiled awkwardly. "Of course, ma'am." As he left, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirrored door, composed, certain no trace of the girl who once begged at the same family table. Weeks passed. The apartment took shape, plants by the terrace, books stacked in uneven towers, sketches of new projects taped across my office wall. I spent my mornings on the balcony, coffee in hand, watching the city wake below. Every now and then I'd hear faint sounds from the penthouse, a laugh, music, the clink of glass. But it didn't sting anymore. It sounded distant, like a story that no longer belonged to me. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, I saw her again. Sienna stepped onto her balcony in a robe, phone pressed to her ear, pacing. Her movements were agitated, her tone sharp even through the glass. I didn't eavesdrop, but I didn't look away either. Eventually, she turned and looked up straight at me. For a second, neither of us moved. The air between us was heavy, thick with all the things we'd never said. Then I raised my coffee cup in a small salute. She froze, then disappeared inside without a word. The next day, I found an envelope slid under my door. No name, no seal, just a note in her handwriting. "I hope this makes you happy." Inside was a keychain shaped like a tiny staircase. I stared at it for a long moment, then set it on the table. Maybe it was sarcasm. Maybe it was an apology. Maybe in her own strange way it was both. Later that week, Leo visited. He stepped out onto the terrace, whistling low. "You weren't kidding when you said perspective," he said. "This view could make anyone feel untouchable." I smiled. "It doesn't make me untouchable, it makes me still." He turned, studying me. "You really did it. You outgrew all of them." "I didn't outgrow them," I said. "I just stopped shrinking." He grinned. "You should write that down." I did. When he left, I sat at my desk, the city glowing below. I opened my journal and wrote, "Some people build ladders to climb out. Others build floors to stand on." The next morning, Sienna's name appeared in the news again. Another brand partnership dissolved, whispers of financial trouble. I didn't feel joy or pity, just inevitability. The same gravity that had pulled me down once was pulling her now. That evening I went downstairs to the lobby. The The concierge looked up in surprise. Heading out, Miss Hartman, just returning something. I handed him the small keychain. Deliver this to the unit below. No note. He nodded. Of course. When I returned upstairs, I stepped out onto the balcony. Below, lights flickered in her penthouse shadows pacing back and forth. Then, slowly, her terrace went dark. The wind carried the faintest hum of the city upward cool against my skin. I leaned on the railing, closing my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt entirely untethered, not to revenge, not to memory, not even to their absence, just here in the air above it all. I whispered to the night, "You were wrong, Sienna. No one saves losers. But sometimes the losers learn how to fly." And beneath me, the city exhaled like a secret finally released. In the weeks that followed, the city grew quieter around me, as if even the skyline had learned to exhale, and just when I thought every bridge had already burned, a letter arrived that made me realize some embers never truly die. The envelope was waiting on my doormat when I came home, a cream rectangle of expensive paper with my full name written in cursive I hadn't seen since my 20s. My mother's handwriting always leaned too far to the right, as though the words were rushing to escape her. I stood there, coat still on, staring at it until the hall light began to hum. For a moment I thought about leaving it unopened, but curiosity and exhaustion often share the same shape. I picked it up and carried it to the kitchen. I made coffee, first poured it into my favorite chipped mug, and sat at the marble counter. The city stretched outside the window's glass towers, reflecting early afternoon haze. I traced my finger over the handwriting before sliding a knife under the flap. The seal broke with a soft sigh. 5 pages. Blue ink. No greeting beyond Isabella, which already told me everything. My mother had never called me Izzy. That nickname was reserved for people who didn't need something from me. She began with a story about the early years, about how hard it had been to raise 2 girls when Dad worked late and money was tight. She said she had always admired my independence, how I never asked for much, how she trusted me to take care of myself. Then she wrote about Sienna, how fragile she'd been as a child, how different her needs were, how I had been strong enough to understand. Each line read like a justification dressed as memory. There was a paragraph about the press, about how humiliating it had been to see our name tossed around by strangers who knew nothing of our sacrifices. She mentioned the gala, my outburst, and the videos that followed. She said she'd been praying for me to find grace again. Not once did she say she was sorry, but near the end there was one sentence that caught my breath. "You were always the strong one, and I see now it cost you everything." I stared at that line for a long time, then set the letter down. Outside, a storm was building, low thunder murmuring against the glass. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to be strong for a family that only wanted me quiet. Maybe she hadn't meant to hurt me, but she had, over and over, in small, polished ways. The kind that never bruised skin, only spirit. I poured another cup of coffee and read the letter again, slower this time, tracing the curve of each apology-shaped excuse. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger, just an ache that hummed like an old song, familiar and far away. Eventually, I pulled out a blank sheet of paper. The surface was smooth, untouched. I stared at it, unsure where to start. Then I wrote, "There are some things that once thrown away cannot be folded back into place, but I'm okay. I don't need the perfect picture anymore. I just need the truth." I signed it I, and set it beside her letter. The next morning I walked to the post office. The rain had stopped, but left everything glistening, the sidewalks, the cars, the air itself. The clerk behind the counter looked up as I slid the envelope forward. "Tracking or no tracking?" she asked. "No," I said. "Some things aren't meant to be traced." She smiled politely, stamped the corner, and tossed it into the outgoing bin. When I returned home, the apartment felt lighter. The quiet didn't press anymore, it breathed. I opened the windows, letting the sea wind drift in, carrying the faint scent of salt and eucalyptus from the coast. For the first time in a long time, The air didn't smell like waiting. Later that afternoon, as I answered emails, my phone buzzed with a news alert. I ignored it at first until Cynthia's name popped up with a message. "Have you seen this?" The headline read, "Heart Foundation, officially dissolved following financial misconduct investigation." My stomach didn't twist this time. It didn't even flutter. The article detailed unpaid vendors, missing donations, and fraudulent accounting under Sienna's direction. My mother's name appeared once buried in a list of advisors. I closed the tab and leaned back in my chair. Maybe this was the universe's strange sense of balance. Maybe it was just coincidence. Either way, I didn't need to watch them fall. I'd already built something higher. That night, I cooked dinner for myself, grilled fish lemon, a small arugula salad, and poured a single glass of wine. I carried it to the balcony and watched the horizon bleed gold into dusk. The ocean moved with quiet certainty, waves curling and uncurling like a breath that had finally found rhythm. When the phone buzzed again, I didn't look. I just set it on the table, turned up the music, and let the sound of rain mix with the melody. I wasn't ignoring the world. I was reclaiming my silence. The next day, a new message appeared on my desk, a letter handwritten in looping script. But this time it wasn't from my mother. It was from one of the scholarship recipients of the Arcline Mentorship Fund. "Dear Miss, hard it began. I used to think people like me didn't belong in tech. But because of your fund, I got my internship at Beacon Systems." My mother cried when I told her. "I hope one day I can do for someone what you did for me." I read it twice, smiling softly. The girl's name was Maya. I pinned the letter to the corkboard beside my desk, right next to the first user email we'd ever received, the one about the daughter's braces. The letters looked beautiful together, proof that something good could grow out of pain without needing revenge to water it. That evening, I called Tess, my lawyer and friend who'd helped manage the fund. "I'm thinking about expanding the scholarship," I said. "How much expansion are we talking?" "Enough to make sure no girl ever has to ask for permission to be seen." She paused, her voice warm. "That sounds like you, Izzy. It sounds like the girl I was," I said. "I think she deserves a legacy." When I hung up, I looked around the apartment, soft lamplight spilling over books, rain tapping gently against the windows. I thought about the letter from my mother sitting somewhere between here and Texas, carried by hands that didn't know it held a lifetime between its folds. Maybe she'd read it and feel nothing. Maybe she'd read it and finally understand. Either way, it was out of my hands. Before bed, I wrote in my journal, "Forgiveness isn't reopening a wound. It's closing it so gently that even the scar feels like peace." I closed the notebook and turned off the light. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered, soft and necessary. And for the first time, I didn't mind the sound. The night after I mailed that letter, the storm finally broke, and by morning the air outside my windows felt washed clean, as if the world itself was ready for whatever I chose to build next. The morning light stretched across the floor like silk. I woke before the alarm, the sound of waves brushing against the cliffs below. The ocean had a rhythm that never demanded anything. It just existed, steady and unapologetic. I wrapped myself in a soft robe and stepped out onto the balcony, the air cool and faintly sweet with salt and lemon balm from the pots along the railing. The world felt wide, quiet, and mine. Downstairs, I heard the faint clink of a mug against granite. Tess was already awake, hair tied in a loose knot, glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed documents at the kitchen island. She looked up and smiled when I entered. "You're up early," she said. "Habit," I replied, pouring coffee into my mug. "It's hard to unlearn." She nodded toward the papers. "The final draft for the left of the Stairwell Fund charter. We just need your signature." I set my mug down, scanning the first page. The logo sat at the top, clean lines, subtle gold lettering. A scholarship for young women in STEM who have been overlooked, underestimated, or unheard. My throat tightened as I read the words aloud. "Do you ever think it's strange," I said, "how the smallest room can lead to the biggest thing you ever build?" Tess smiled softly. You turned what hurt you into something that heals. That's not strange, it's rare. I signed my name, the ink flowing easily. There, I said. It's real now. She nodded, setting the papers aside. So what next? I walked toward the large window overlooking the ocean. We let it grow, quietly like light spreading under a door. The day moved slow and golden. Emails poured in, messages of support, partnership, offers, thank you notes from students who had seen the announcement. The fund had gone live overnight, and already the world was listening. But for once I didn't feel the need to respond to everything. The story was no longer about me. It was about the ones who came next. Around noon, Tess left for her flight back to Chicago. I hugged her tightly. You'll come back for the first awards ceremony. Wouldn't miss it, she said. Just promise me one thing, take a day off before you start saving the world again. I laughed. No promises. After she left, the house felt still. Not empty, just resting. I walked through each room's sunlight, shifting across the walls, catching edges of framed sketches and half-finished manuscripts. The small studio near the stairs was my favorite space now. I had converted it into a creative corner, white walls, a skylight, 2 windows framing the sea. It had once been a storage room. Now it was the heart of everything I'd built. I sat at the desk, brushing my fingers over the drafts of my next book. Building from silence. It wasn't about revenge or success. It was about survival, the kind that doesn't roar but breathes. For a moment I thought of Sienna. I hadn't heard from her since the foundation scandal broke months ago. Word was she had left the country. Some said Italy, others Thailand. I didn't check. The truth was I didn't need closure anymore. Not from her, not from my parents. The space between us had stopped feeling like loss. It had become clarity. That afternoon, the wind picked up, carrying faint gull cries through the open windows. I stepped outside with a notepad, barefoot on the warm stone of the terrace. The ocean glittered like glass. Below, the waves struck the rocks and retreated again, tireless and forgiving. I breathed in deep, the salt air filling my lungs, and felt something I hadn't in years, peace that didn't need an audience. A soft ping from my phone broke the stillness. A new email. Subject, thank you. It was from a woman named Harper, one of the scholarship's first applicants. She wrote, I grew up in a family where girls were told to dream small. Your story gave me permission to dream loud. Thank you for building something that reminds us we don't have to wait for permission to matter. I read it twice, then looked toward the horizon, tears pricking the corners of my eyes. It was strange how validation from a stranger could soothe wounds that family never managed to touch. By sunset, the house glowed in amber light. I opened a bottle of Cabernet, poured a single glass, and took it to the terrace. The ocean below shimmered, the horizon melting into pink and gold. I raised the glass not in triumph but in gratitude for the silence that shaped me, the laughter that scarred me, and the distance that taught me peace. As twilight settled, I thought about all the people who had told me no. The teachers who ignored me, the investors who doubted me, the family who called me difficult. Every rejection had been a brick, and somehow I'd built a home from them. I turned on the small outdoor speaker and let an old jazz record play softly. The melody floated into the night, mingling with the crash of waves. When darkness fell, I went back inside. The lights in the city glittered, like constellations, each window a story, each one fighting its own quiet battle. I sat on the couch, notebook in hand, and wrote, sometimes the real victory isn't being seen. It's standing tall when no one's looking. My phone buzzed again, this time a notification from the fund's official page. Thousands of messages, comments, and stories from women around the world. Some heartbreaking, some hopeful, all connected. I smiled and typed a short post before logging off. If you've ever been pushed aside, laughed at, or told to wait, your turn, don't. Build your own door and open it wide enough for someone else to follow. Thank you for walking this road with me. I hit send. The post went live, and within minutes the comments started flowing. Messages of gratitude, solidarity, and love. I didn't need to read them all to feel their warmth. Outside, the sea kept its rhythm, the night, vast and endless. I leaned back, listening. If you've ever been made to feel invisible, I hope my story reminds you that silence isn't weakness, it's just strength, gathering its breath. And when it finally speaks, it can move mountains. Tell me, have you ever had to rebuild yourself from the ground up? Have you ever turned pain into purpose? Share your story with me in the comments. Like, subscribe, stay with us, because sometimes the quietest voices carry the furthest. The tide rolled in again, steady and sure. And for the first time, I didn't just survive the silence. I owned it.